Well, I guess I'll tell you about what I do on a day-to-day basis. A man or a woman, mother, father, sometimes together, sometimes individually, come into my office with their young person, their child. And it's a very awkward session, that first one. Mom and dad come in, the young person, sometimes this person is 7 or 8 or 12 or 13. Sometimes they're 30. And they sit in the office, and as I said, it's a very awkward time. The young person comes in and sits in the chair, you've been in my office, the one closest to the window, and their body language, if you read Julie's first research, is turned totally away from all of us. I have an upstairs office with a big picture window, and their attention is totally outside. Their knees, their face, their shoulders, everything is totally away from us. And then mom or dad or both start telling me the story about how they found them with a pot or the alcohol or the pain pills or whatever it was that troubled the family so much. And that goes on for 10 or 15 minutes, however long. And I sit quietly. And if there's any way that young person could get out that window, they'd go. But they're stuck in the corner. You know, that's the furthest window from the door. And then I say, well, why don't you let us talk a little bit? And the parents reluctantly leave. And then I say to this young person, I'm giving away my secrets, so you can't share it out of this room. I say to this young person, man, do you have a problem? And then they dig into the chair like they're about to be addressed by the Marine drill instructor. Watch. So you have scared parent syndrome. It must be terrible living in your house with your parents treating you this way. Then they sort of turn around and look at me like, maybe I'm not so bad after all. I said, what we've got to do, you and I, we've got to figure out a way to help your parents not be so afraid. Because they're petrified. They don't look mean, they don't look scared to me, they're just mean. I said, it must be tough. They probably have taken away everything. All your electronics, your car if they're old enough to have a car, of course. They won't let you talk on the cell phone, they won't let you see your friends. They probably let you go to school and then immediately come home. I'm sure this hasn't happened to you. No, right. I saw you in Annie, you were fantastic. Anyway, and then the kid's going, yeah, man, it's terrible. I say, okay, what can we do to help your parents not be so afraid? And then they're engaged. Now, I ask all my patients when they come to see me to tell me if they use drugs. And most of them will say no. And then I'll say, well, do you smoke pot? Well, yeah, I smoke pot. That's not a drug. Well, you drink alcohol? Well, yeah, I drink alcohol, but that's not a drug. Most young people know more about drugs than parents will think. The problem is, what they know about drugs is not correct information. They have knowledge about drugs, substances, alcohol, cannabis, whatever kind of drug, 4-methylmethacapolone, bath salts. I've seen treated 175 people in the hospital with bath salts overdose, and since October of 2010. And every one of these guys, a few women, woke up thinking that it was perfectly safe. Why? Because they read it on the internet. And they spent 8 to 11 days intubated in the hospital because they thought it was safe. There's a tremendous amount of misinformation out there. And these young people are spreading it around. So don't think that the young people out there don't know a lot about drugs. What they know is just wrong. So part of what I have to do in helping these young people generate less fear in their parents is I have to help them understand why their parents are afraid. And their parents are afraid for legitimate reasons, by the way. Now, you can do the same thing I am, that I'm doing, and just save yourself a lot of therapy dollars. Let me tell you how it starts. It starts, and I try to educate all the people I do premarital counseling with another one of my secrets. When your little 5 or 7 or 9-year-old comes home from school and tells you something that scares you to death, you can't panic. When your 5-year-old comes home, or your kindergarten, your first grader comes home, and opens up that precious little hand and shows you a Valium, and said, Guess what Joey gave me, or Carrie gave me at school today? And you see that little blue pill? What do? Most parents freak out. They need to value themselves. They have a connection. I learned that word when I was a young kid. And you know what you should do? You should say, thank you for bringing that to me. Give them a big hug. Say, we need to talk about this. Then go in the bedroom, turn up the radio really loud. Then you can scream. But don't do it in front of your children. If they come home and they say, Mommy, this is your kindergartner, what's sex? Now maybe all they want to know is to check the male or female box. They may not want that hour-and-a-half lecture. If they come home and say, my friend Joey and I, they were visiting last night, they're 9 years old. We figured out a way, it's so exciting, Mommy. We took those big bottles that Joey's dad has down in the cabinet, and we drank some of that stuff, and then we put water in there so he'll never know. Thank you for telling me. Don't freak out. You know what'll happen if you freak out? They'll never tell you anything again. The most wonderful gift your child can give you is to tell you everything. That's why your kids don't tell you stuff. Well, maybe one reason. You want your children to tell you everything. The finest gift they can give you is the fact that they trust you to tell you everything. Well, back to when they show up in the office. So what I do is, if they're not adults, if they're not 18 and they have their own rights of confidentiality, I bring the parents back in at the end of the session. The kid's now sitting up, the child's now sitting up, and their knees are facing me, and they're acting so much more calm now that we figured out the real problem is their parents' fear, not their drug use, which of course they're connected. I say, well, Joey or Susan or whatever her name is, and I had a really good session, and I would like to have an agreement that you will allow me to keep what they tell me in confidence, which I can do by law. The parents will agree. And we're going to meet maybe 2-3 times a week, as often as I need. Now, this is assuming they don't need to go to detox, that it's not a major problem. Sometimes it is. They need to go to treatment. And the parents will say, oh, are you sure it's okay? Yeah, I think it's going to be okay. Sometimes we use drug screens, whatever technique we need, and we start. And the parents will sometimes trust me, the weird guy, the stranger, to help them and the young people work out a plan. And we've had pretty good success with that. Now, if they don't show up, then I'm calling the parents, or Sally, my office manager, is calling the parents, saying, what happened to Joey or Susie? Well, and then if the lies start, then we have to go to plan B or C or D, whichever plan. But we've had pretty good success. And then once we can get these young people to really see what it's like to be clear-headed, of course, they don't think these drugs affect their thinking. You ever heard that? They're not really drugs. I read it on the internet. I love that commercial, whichever one, I don't even know what it's advertising. The woman is telling the guy that she read it on the internet, they can't put anything, and the guy from France shows up. I talk about that commercial a lot. It's a great commercial. I don't even know what they're selling. I don't get that on the commercial, but it's a wonderful thing. Kids really believe this. They read it on the internet. Of course, they don't read everything, just the stuff they want to believe. So we do a lot of drug education. And there are some good sites about drugs. WebMD has some good information. Dr. Bob's, not the one about the alcoholics, that's a good one too, but there's also a Dr. Bob's site. There's a lot of good information about these things. And parents, you don't have to know everything about drugs. You can find some people who know. And if not, you can get in touch with people like the people at MAD. Do you realize that Tennessee law, and Mr. McKenzie can verify this, that Tennessee law is better today because of that? Our alcohol laws are better because of organizations like that. People like, they know a lot of information about drugs. There are people out there that can help you. You can find information on the internet. You can find a professional that can help you. You can find somebody in recovery that can help you. Don't try to go it alone. But let me talk a little bit about the power of parents. You hear everybody talking about wanting to delegate educating your children to someone. I don't mind doing it. The schools will try to help. But the real power in educating your children is you. I'm not here to tell you how to be parents, that's not my job. I will tell you how to communicate with your children, but the key in communicating with children is just building a relationship with them. Taking the time. It doesn't take all that much time. It just takes a willingness to be quiet and to listen. Kids speak a different language than you do. And they just need to talk. And they need to know that you're going to be there to listen. And if you will sit and listen to them, like I do, they'll tell you amazing things. They just want to know that you're willing to listen and take the time to be with them, to be present with them. There's something in the Bible about that, isn't there? It's just good common sense. And when they have questions, and children have questions, out of every 150 questions, there'll be 4 or 5 really important ones. And if we get burned out and stop listening to the questions, they know. They're amazingly sensitive to us. Sometimes we just have to sit down and start listening to those questions. So where do stars come from, Mommy? Right. And what's this stuff about drugs on TV? There's an important one. And how come my friend Joey smells like this funny stuff, smells like mouthwash when he comes to school in the morning? Well, maybe he's using mouthwash. No, he says it's not mouthwash. It's something that his daddy drinks and he gets into his daddy's cabinet. Oh, that's important. And those kind of questions, that's when you want to talk about it. And is alcohol really dangerous? I mean, my friend's drinking alcohol at home at night. He says it makes him feel better. Does alcohol make you feel better? Maybe you've never consumed alcohol. How do you answer that question? Those are critically important questions. The first thing you want to do when your child asks you that question is you want to thank him or her for asking you. Thank you so much for asking that question. If you don't know, just say, well, I don't know, but I'll help you find out. Communication is so critical for children, and we're so busy. But we have them. You know, there's more than just having them and having a celebration at the hospital and bringing flowers. It's a lifelong commitment. It's good if you can connect with other parents who have kids the age of your kids. The other thing about having children is that sometimes the questions they ask make us uncomfortable. Now, I'm a guy, in case you didn't notice, and we guys particularly don't like to be comfortable. If I were to ask you, do you know who 70% of my patients are? Women. You know why? Because men are afraid. Sorry, guys. I know these guys are afraid.
True story.
Men don't want to come to therapy. I'll tell you another secret. So, guys, if your wives use this on you, you know where it came from. Well, Dr. Averitt says that you don't have to come in for therapy, but he doesn't like to just get one side of the situation. If you'll come in, kind of act as a consultant to tell him your side, he can better help me. You know why I do that? To get the men in there. Because it's really not fair to counsel one half. If it's a domestic situation, or if it's somebody's depressed, or you're having trouble with your kids. So, men need to talk more. Why do you suppose, if you come to the hospital and watch these women in their 70s pushing around these guys in their 70s in wheelchairs, what do you suppose that's about? You think it's because the guys work so hard? No. You used to believe that. If you read the 1950s literature, that's what it said. The guys are in wheelchairs because they worked hard. Nope, not true. The reason is because women express their feelings better. Guys hold their feelings in, which is good for my business, but not good for you. A number of years ago, we had Dr. Tony Hudson, when he was on the staff, we had all these guys in their 30s and 40s having heart attacks. And they put them in the ICU, we give them Valium or some kind of benzodiazepine, and they'd be relaxed. Of course, they'd want their secretaries and their TVs and their telephones and their fax machines, which we wouldn't give them. And I'd go in and say, guys, if you want to live, you're going to have to learn how to feel this way without the Valium. You're going to have to learn how to deal with your stress. So, guys need to learn to talk. You know, your sons, okay, I'm preaching, take off 5 minutes from church on Sunday. Your sons need to see you model that behavior. Your daughters need to see you model that behavior, so they'll pick a guy like you're trying to be when they get married. It's not just talking to your kids about drugs. It's learning how to be comfortable with difficult topics. Now the Mormons, I'm not supporting Mormons or anything like that, but they came up with this idea called family home evening. Every Monday night, no Monday night football. Boy, what a sacrifice. They get together and they have family discussions. I suggest that for all couples I see. So you sit down, what are we going to talk about tonight? It doesn't make any difference. We're just going to talk. Couples talk. Really bad for my business. I'm giving out one of my secrets here. But it's really good for couples and it's really good for families. Okay, what are we going to talk about tonight? It's amazing when you sit down and have a discussion how people will bring up all kinds of issues. Like drugs. Like alcohol. What's all this stuff on TV about drugs and alcohol? Is it really that bad? Remember, don't get upset. Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. That was a wonderful question. Let's talk about that. And then things are in the paper. The Herald Citizen, I'm not against Herald Citizen. Mary Jo's one of my favorite people, most of the time. But they have stuff in there all the time. Because the assistant district attorneys and the district attorney in this area are prosecuting people. They're putting them in jail. Why? Because they're violating the law. That's what they need to be. The police department is arresting people, and the sheriff's department. That's a great opportunity to talk to your children about what happens for people who are driving under the influence and driving under the influence of drugs and alcohol. Well, gee, maybe there are some consequences to that. But I heard at school people saying that they're doing this or doing that. By the way, they'll come up with names of drugs you never heard of before. You can Google them. You'll find out what they are. You can ask someone. Call the police department. We'll be glad to tell you about it. Our officers know. And so you can have a discussion. But you have to be not afraid to be uncomfortable. So it's going to make you a little uncomfortable. What are the 3 things you need to talk to your kids about? Well, you need to talk about sex. Ooh, not just where to check the box. You need to talk to them about guns. In our state, not too far from here, a 4-year-old child shot a woman who was the wife of a deputy. That should never happen. But it did happen. If you have firearms in your house, you need to talk about that. And you say, well, we tell our kids where the guns are, not to touch them. You don't know children like I do. Children are created by God to be curious. You have to take the high step about that. You have to keep those weapons safe. And you know where most children get access to drugs? From the pharmacy? From the household pharmacy. And where's that? Wherever you keep your drugs. Medicine cabinet, drawer, wherever you keep them. So you've got to keep those safe too. It's just thinking ahead. Well, my 15-year-old would never go in my closet. You haven't been around 15-year-olds that I've been around, or 12-year-olds. And recently, in this very school system, one of our schools that starts with a P, we had several children who brought drugs from home and took them, and were so overwhelmed by them that to come to the hospital. So you say, well, it'll never happen to me. Well, you talk to the EMS workers around here. What do they think? Does it happen to people? It happens to people. That's what these guys do for a living. So you have the power to make a difference. Number 1, expect the unexpected. Who would have expected to be running in the Boston Marathon and have 2 bombs go off? That's an institution of this country. Now, don't be paranoid. Just be aware. So please be willing to be uncomfortable and talk about difficult issues with your children. But I want them to be safe. I want them to be protected. This is how you do protect them. You educate them. Secondly, have better communication with everybody in the family. Be willing to take time. And third, just listen to your kids. When they say something that scares you to death, say, thank you for telling me that. You can always go back to the bedroom and scream later. Call me and scream at me. I don't mind. And then you can sit down with your children and come up with a plan. They come home and say that their friend is doing something destructive, doing something that's not safe. Come up with a plan with your child about how you're going to deal with that. Make them a more responsible friend. And if it's something that needs to be reported, then report it. Now the ADA's back here, he can tell you, I've heard him talk about this, who in this country, in this state, by law, is responsible for reporting suspicion of child abuse? Everybody. You should read that law. It lists all these people, lists me, psychologists, lists judges, and lists everybody, and then it says, and everybody else. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
That's exactly right. And if you don't do that, you can be held accountable under the law. Oh boy, I don't want to think about that. Don't want to think about that. Might cause trouble, might make my neighbor mad. You can do it confidentially. There's a 1-800 number. And your children, remember, are seeing you model for them. I know I got off on a lot of topics here, but I'm just so excited to be talking to parents. I'm so excited you were willing to come here. I'm so excited about this organization and what's going on here. This is actually wonderful. Drugs are just a part of what we deal with, and it's people like you, parents, that can make a difference. And remember, every one of you knows how many parents? A bunch. We probably couldn't count them tonight. And you're going to go out and talk about this. I know you are. And some parents are going to call you one day and say, you know, my son came home and he's got this green leafy stuff. What do you suppose this is? Well, you know, the police department will be glad to come help you identify it. We have this great kit. We can identify it for sure. Doesn't mean somebody's going to jail. We just want to help. We love taking people to jail. I work with the police department too. We love taking people to jail. We like that. It's fun. But we're not just there to take people to jail. We have a box in our police department where we can dispose of any kind of medicine, that you have that you want to get rid of. We take care of that. There are a lot of people in this community that will help you. So, I just wanted to come tonight and talk to you a little bit about talking to your children about drugs. And it's something you can do. It's something anybody can do. The most important thing is to make yourself and your children have good communication in general. So I appreciate you coming, and I hope this has been helpful.